So what I want to do today is consider the notions of ethnographies and now this idea of virtual ethnography, netnography. So I'm going to break down the ideas around the theory, around the methodology, and present some of my background research to show you how I've been using it, and to show you why sometimes it becomes difficult to... You've got a whole glut of information. The wonderful thing we're finding with digital technology is it throws simple loads of data at you. But my talk is going to be more about that's well and good, but there's a bigger picture that we have to present and understand as researchers. It's not just about the biggest story, the fact proving. We're not necessarily driven by the research drive around scientific motivations to monetize or measure everything. Well, particularly myself as a social scientist and a critical theorist. So at the beginning of your research, you always need to think, what am I doing this for? Even as professional researchers. If you're having to engage with a project that you aren't totally ideologically connected to, that's fine, because you know the boundaries. But then you're going to have to adapt your approach, your method, your theory accordingly. So anyhow, I'll go on as the presentation continues. So what I'm going to look at is this idea of netnography. I'm sure, before I go on, who in the room describes themselves as a qualitative researcher? So about a little bit more than half. What about a quantitative researcher? Yeah, a little bit less. And what about a mixed methods group? Okay, so it's about equal across the room. So hopefully this will be interesting for everybody. Okay, it sounds as though I'm going to focus on qualitative research a lot, but there is important things to learn as different researchers. Now, I'm not going to be able to go into mixed methods too much. I've just looked at the posters, and the interesting thing about the array of submissions is the level of how close they are, how they're understanding their research process. And this is the thing that will continue, hopefully, as good researchers, this question, can I be a good researcher? Am I being true to the data, to my theory, to my building within the bigger knowledge bubble of the world? What is it that I'm doing? And so myself, my PhD was on spatial understandings of the impact of the web on a publishing firm. So right back in 2002, 1998, I was starting to look at the internet. It wasn't as challenging then because, it was quite black screens. There wasn't Windows interface. It was a different environment. Now, with all that we have, social media is so drawn into what we're doing. We find it, I think many people find it confusing how we're going to use all this. So netnography springs up. I am an anthropologist. My background is anthropology, sociology, a dual degree. Then I did a master's in media studies in humanities. Then I did a PhD in computing engineering. So like many of us, we've all got tales of things. And bringing all those bits of knowledge, I was thrown into a world where there was lots of quantitative analysis going on. Having to manage it in particularly a computing science school was a challenge, no more than a challenge than in a business school. But coming back to ethnography, so what I want to do is explore this online, offline, this continual struggle we're having at the moment, both theoretically and methodologically. Are they the same? Is it a continuation? Are they mutually exclusive? So I'm going to relate this to my research because I have a dilemma. While I'm analysing particularly, this constantly breaks into my mind. What am I doing? Am I representing an online experience, an offline experience? Can I represent what's going on between? Do I need to? And particularly, I know that to prove and be published, I have to do it rigorously. If you want to get into a 3-4-star journal, you cannot be weak on method. Particularly if you're a qualitative researcher, it's very difficult to have an ethnography published because they're huge. My PhD I drew on Lefebvre, so I had to have 3 layers of analysis. Getting almost 3 chapters published, I've only ever published in conferences about that material. So it's difficult, don't be fooled, it's difficult to do qualitative research because, as we know also at this moment in time, we're very much being driven by the scientific agenda. What is science? How do we fix the world with technology often is coming through. So I'm wondering, how can I handle my data? But particularly for this talk, I'm going to talk about true representation, and you'll see this. What does this actually mean? So the study I'm going to draw on to show some of this dilemma, I have 2 studies, so I might throw in this. I'm doing new work at the moment on digital content in the creative industries. It's giving me different dilemmas to this one, but I'm going to focus on this one. So I was working on an EPSRC grant. We have £750,000 to study online motivation to do stuff for free. Why do people volunteer? Why are we having huge crowds of people sitting at their computers for hours and hours, plugging in and understanding or contributing to a science in this case? So we looked at citizen science on the biggest citizen science platform in the world, the Zooniverse. I won't tell you about it because there's a number of published papers, but as a background, I had a component of this larger project. So in my part, what I wanted to do was portray the user's experience. We had the scientist's experience, we had the organizational experience. We knew big numbers existed. We know lots of people are interested in contributing to understanding data, but there's very little about the user experience. So I applied, and then I started to look at 3 areas: the production of value, a core area which I hope a number of other people are interested. Value, what is it? Is it power? It's a very social science question. Then I also wanted to look at, well, who owns this? Is it a collective process? Is it an individual process? What is ownership? Again, quite a social question. And then lastly, I wanted to look at the politics of open source acts. Now this is where I start to twist, because politics is quite a specialised area, and it brings in layers of complexity. So that was probably the hardest for me to be able to do. But because it's an open source platform, because this idea of motivation, it was important to look at it. So all these were considered, and specifically from the user's point of view. I want to stress this. So we know we all have layers of analysis. The first question, what is, in our research, in our methodology research design, what is our audience? Who are we addressing, and who are we saying we represent? If I say I represent the individual user on a massive platform, how am I going to show that in the research? Now that is true qualitative research. Quantitatives will tell you the numbers. They will tell you huge amounts of people are involved. Traffic flows, network connections, all these things, yes. But if you want to provide a true representation of the user, you have to get the voice through. So I'll expand on this as I go through. But I'm also going to talk about the dilemma of the digital stuff. Okay, so what method did we use? We all know in ethnography, the traditional ethnographers say we must have long-term in-field experience. Now, I battled this in my PhD. Minimum of 10 years, many anthropologists were saying. You need to go and live with the tribe if you want to describe. You have to feel it. So the battle came in around early 2000s, where researchers started to say, well, how can we say this? This intensity of experience online, surely that means it affects time, that we can reduce the time. It can be days, hours, minutes, months. It doesn't have to be 10 years. Now that debate goes on. And I think those who want to study online need to think about themselves. Is it okay to represent your audience, the idea of what you're presenting, in 1 month? Do you really know them? in 6 months. Now, this is where you have to become, and if you're going to be a qualitative researcher, you have to accept, I'm good at this, I might be a bit strange. I was called strange yesterday because you ask people strange things, you look at strange things, you get involved. But that's because you want to represent it. So this is very, very important. Anyhow, so 1 year online ethnography. The idea with one year was to have as complete as we could with funds, someone on the platform every day. Now I'll come back to this because this became a problem later on. So what we did, because obviously I had to teach, I had all the demands, I employed a postgraduate researcher to sit online and carry out the project for a year. So she looked at 3 different projects within this large platform. There's a whole load of different mini projects. So we identified some. We had one that was a continual year experience. It comes up and goes down, comes up and goes down. And she sat every few days clicking through things. Then there was bursts of projects. So we looked at different types of projects. We also looked at the data they were analysing, how scientific they were. So we balanced and chose. So it was punctuated research. Now the thing that I find with ethnography most of the time is you have to have a time factor. Now in reviewing some of the posters, I've said this to a few of them. In trying to understand to present your audience and trying to understand what you're doing and how you relate to it, you must have time. You must have the research dilemma says we freeze time. If you're going to tell that story, it's that frozen moment in time. It's as different to quantitative research, which is telling you grand theory or giving you big numbers. It's a different message you're trying to produce. So for this particular study, I drew on Bayham's approach. Now I'll explain for those who don't know. Bayham's very interesting because they're trying to link traditional notions of ethnography with virtual ethnography. I think perhaps one of the best and the theorists I'm reading. So what we did was, over this 1 year's practice, we had 80,000 words of thick description. Does everybody know what thick description is? So, as an anthropologist, sociologist, you taught Rorty and a number of postmodern, early writers. Describe the importance of the narrative, the way in which we convey our story. So, if you're going to be true, and this will come back again, what I'm going to say later, you have to be able to express the voice, the notion of the community, the individual. So thick description does this. It's not just enough to be punctuating, capturing quotes from people. They are very useful, but the balance between your research diary, your own immersive experience, and that of those you are studying is vital. So if you're currently, in any of your research, doing just grabs from the internet, that's not enough, not in a qualitative approach. You need to debrief regularly, either individually, with your supervisor, but it has to become part of your method, the way in which you're gathering the data. So for this example, we did do 80,000 words thick description, hundreds of screenshots. Now this is where it starts to change. This is why traditional ethnography is altered. And debriefing notes. So it's not just about your experiences as you're gathering data, but a reflexive later position, debriefing. Because once you've had a whole day working with people or an immense experience at an event, you're in that event at that moment. You need time to reflect. And this is why qualitative research isn't as simple as often made out. So it takes practice. It takes years of writing it up and experimenting with the way that you write and gather. So my data. So let's get into some of the detail. So these 2 slides have to go together. I can go backwards too. I want to talk about the field diary, as well as that last shot, which was the screenshot of what goes with one of these elements that are put in the field diary. So for this study, we drew on a traditional field diary approach in anthropology. As you can see, you have time punctuation. You start your project, 15th of August. And if you're doing a daily break, a daily intervention, you note that day. You note the time. You note what's going on, because they are your freezes in time, your moments of time. Then you explain your observations. What is it that I'm seeing? It can be as raw as often the way that you understand what's in front of you. Then importantly, and often hardest in the field, is your third column, which explains the stuff that you're feeling, the more stuff. I really didn't like how that was presented. That person looks, you can swear, you can do what you want. The beauty of qualitative research is the thick description, the richness. These people are really peeving me off today. Yesterday was a lovely experience. Whatever's going on, it needs to go in there. And this is where it becomes interesting also to reflect on it, but this is where it became a problem in this research. So for this research, the PhD, the postdoc that I employed, I have to say she didn't enjoy it. So as the diary was taken over the months and months and months, it was flavoured by her account. It was boring. It was mundane. It became work. So my focus had to shift a little bit. It was about her experience, and then I had to start to think, was this corrupted? Because she was being forced to do it every day. So I had to account for that. But what I want to show you, and the point I'm highlighting and waiting on this, I found very, very useful the field diary, traditional, but also now that you can grab images. Can I go back? When you're understanding your debriefing, when you're reflecting on what you're doing, the pictures are fantastic. They add the context. They often re-energize you to know what's going on. So what I'm finding now, as I'm analysing my qualitative data, being able to use the visuals, the textual, your debrief, it is so much more exciting. It's great to analyse and write up. But the method is a bit weak. We have lots of problems with how do we understand the visual. So yes, I'm going back to Sontag, to some of the early theorists to try and understand this use. Who else? There's an Australian academic also. Anyhow, anybody who'd like to know some of the visual methods, please give me an email or have a look. There's lots going on. But this coupling of the amazing things that are going on the internet as you're doing your ethnography, there's a big question, how are we going to represent that later? Now that question goes on. So my dilemma also was that because this was a large project, we had 4 strands of research going on. Some very quantitative, mine extremely qualitative, and yet also that middle role, the really sociological position where you use numbers, but you also use interviews. So this was the example. So in this study, we had, it ran for a while. We had 2,737 surveys put out to the crowd. We had, I think it was a 70-odd% return. I didn't put it up in that slide. But after we then got rid of all the bits and problems, we had about 2,000 people reply. So our design for this part was, how do we get 2,000 people to give some sort of qualitative representation? We had fantastic things about, so these were the projects specifically that were explored. So my qualitative part was the Galaxy Zoo, Penguin Watch, and Snapshot Serengeti. So there was an overlap between my very, very deep analysis and then this more mixed methods. And yes, I want to use it, but how do I use it? Because it wasn't in my original design, so I'm still pondering that. Now this is why I became interested. Because out of that 2,000 people, how do we then get some depth? So what we did was randomly selected 23 people, of which 19 replied and said, yes, we'd love to be interviewed. So this was the depth to that big 2,000 mob. Now, is that appropriate? Well, we could continually argue. Importantly, does my academic community feel it is? So getting this published is the key. Then I feel confirmed that it's okay. So I haven't had that done yet, so let's see. But one of the quotes was, I think it's important because it makes science accessible again. This idea of putting mass participation to understand data. I think a lot of people, science has become too complicated and academic. And they're kind of almost snobby. We all hear this. Academics they think they're better, they're outside the real world. Oh, and you're not smart enough. You can't help us. And this just turns that on its head. You absolutely can help. And it doesn't matter what level you are, you could also learn about science. So the user feels empowered in this quote. So I see this, and I saw this often when I had a chance for the users to say it. Now, as coming back to my dilemma with the ethnography, my ethnographer wasn't feeling that way. She was bored. She didn't like doing it every day. So then, as the person writing it up, coming back to the importance, how do I represent that? And also some of the other interesting bits of data. So this is the organisational data. You know, now we can get scrapes, sweeps, 10% of Twitter, all this stuff, it's all fun. And this is fun. So this represents when people most often use the site. So this is over a year's snapshot. And the big red spike in the middle is when many media couples, so they have a TV show that they sometimes look at stars. When that TV show goes on, boom, everybody's online. Everybody's analysing data, everybody's into it. Other times it drops right away. And interestingly, from this data also we can identify super users. So those well immersed people who categorise more than 1,000 bits of data a day. We can pinpoint down to who they are. This is what the technology allows us to do. But is that useful for my research? Not really. I could throw away a one-liner saying this is when people are most motivated, but that's not what my study is about. So this is what I find a number of people get confused about. There's interesting bits of data, but if your research isn't designed about these big bursting moments, they only just give you a little flavour. It's no point focusing on them. You need to stick to your original research design. Now, how experienced you are and your supervisor will help you with this, but with all my students, and some are here in the room, this is what I say: come back to your central question. Come back all the time reflecting on what you're doing. It's easy to run away, find interesting bits, and that's when you have problems. So no, I wouldn't use this. But I would use this. And again, it's another problem I have. So as part of the ethnography, taking the screenshots in a site where there's over 1 million people and I'm wanting to represent the user's perspective. This person, part of what I did was another area in the study is looking at gaming, because people are motivated through fun and play. So this is a quote from one of the users. Another game, all you do is take the last word from the person above yours acronym and you make it an acronym, and out of that you have 2 hard eggs, for example. So this group of people online created a game. So the interesting thing I found in this was that quote represents a whole play notion. It represents much more, but I don't know this guy. If I'm going to give a qualitative story about it, how am I going to present his voice? I'd have to go and live and be part of that to be able to really understand it. Or if I'm going to use some other method, I have to have enough of this individual or similar individuals that I can then represent this as a true understanding of what this community is going on about. Again, methodologically, is this how are we going to do this? Because do I say direct quote? Do I say use the picture of him as he's cool at the window? What is it that's really showing me and being able to show my reader, the people who are interested in my research, that this is really what this community thinks? And in taking The idea of a true account doesn't have to be a fact. It allows the humanitarian side, the humanities to come in. It's not all just about money, if we break it down, money and success. Sometimes we have to bring back to what's right and wrong. So if these people are feeling gaming is a good thing, why shouldn't we tell the organisers, more games please? Might not make them much money, but it's useful. And again, we're all looking and wondering, Facebook. There's so much going on with Facebook. The study I'm doing about creative content at the moment, probably the largest element I'm going to have to draw on is Facebook. But you know there are a number of journals who refuse. If you haven't got Facebook permission, you can't even get your submission considered. So we need to push against this. We need to understand, we need to say, how are scientists, social scientists, all of us going to present this? So again, this is the posts from a community within that the Zooniverse. And what they do, again, it's the gaming part. They gather clusters of asteroids, and they get so bored they put them into colours, ranges of colours. There's a competition where they set it up. But what I really like about this part of the ethnography that I did was how true you can represent with some of these pictures. The way that they are illustrating, the way they're communicating together. So again, I'll have to figure out how I can present that. So the visual, I hope I'm stressing to you enough, the visual component is becoming a problem. Because we are used to a textual word. We like words, we're wordsmiths. In vivo, these things aren't going to help us. How are we going to start to deal with this? So this is penguins. I told you this is one of the projects. So it was a really interesting study because, as you see, people quite like clicking on penguins. So there's a big problem in the world. There's not enough penguins. There's millions of penguins, but we don't know how many. So they've been going around taking photos, and then they want people to click and count every single one. Now, the comment that came back about this, we like it. We like the cute ones. We get really sick of when there's too many. But what do you notice first, what it looks like? Looking down the barrel of a gun. So many people were disturbed that the clicking, the interface between the technology and what you're trying to achieve, understanding how many penguins, looking for the cute ones, you actually look like you're shooting them. So there was a problem for the users about the interface. So again, an important discussion, an important element of the research. How do I explain it? So as we're using these different types of data, we have a massive glut. Our methods are behind, or they're not. Now, this is, I think this is the key of what I want to present today. So how am I challenging? What am I doing? I say now I'm doing a virtual ethnography. Now it becomes a little bit complicated because there's this crossover between an ethnographic method and an ethnographic analysis. Now, I'm more on the ethnographic analysis side. I do qualitative research, but there's more to it. So let's say I've drawn on Hine and Rude Leader. So what they say is, contrary to traditional ethnography, virtual ethnography allows observation of an audience's expression of thoughts and virtualized behaviour that are not easily accessible in the physical world. So they acknowledge this difficulty. It isn't easy. As I've just described, shooting penguins is something, how are you going to describe it? Is it as simple as saying that? It's not that simple. So I think that's a useful starting point. Then we look at consonants. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong, but and when I drew upon this, the work wasn't published, so maybe it's published now. But to sort of put the two positions against each other, netnography is, as other types of ethnography, so there's a linking, consists of the researcher's field notes. Yes, so what I feel I'm doing is right, about her cybercultural field experiences. So combined with the artifacts, which is our technology, the interface, the way they're understanding the tools, this becomes the culture of that community. So I need to take into account the technology, the interface, my experience, but ultimately, in my case, if I'm presenting a user's position, I have to have the voice of the user. So in a typical netnography, and see how slow the methods are at catching up, around 1997, so this is not when we have beautiful Facebook interface, Windows, anything. This is very early on, Sun stations and maybe Windows interfaces. This data will mainly be textual, consisting of downloaded files of news groups, postings, transcripts, MUDs, relay chats, these types of things. There also may be some pictures, photographs, artwork, sound files. Now, Cosnets is acknowledging it, and it's now time for us to build upon that, or draw on others who are building the ideas. So the question that I raised at the beginning, are all virtual ethnographies, netnographies? Are they all just ethnographies? In my perspective, it's about the write-up. It's about your analysis. It's simple to construct, to do a research process. If you're a true researcher and a good researcher, the way that you represent the findings of your study, the outcome is vital. It's most important. If you don't provide and set up your tools, you're going to have a problem. But you may be able to, in the trueness of your voice, in the write-up, represent that. So, and I draw on this and I say this because Atkinson's one of my heroes. Atkinson says ethnographic analysis is not linked primarily to a set of data or a time frame, but instead has the objective of providing thorough, careful, and accurate exploration of the range of lived experiences of the research subjects. So, a big statement. But what Atkins is actually saying is, if you had a year, 10 years ethnography, you've lived with a whole group of people, but you find one day represents the whole way that you understand that community, it's okay to focus your findings, your study, your description on that one day. It represents the 10 years. But you must, as a researcher and a writer, be able to do it properly. So that could be a lifetime's work for that one day of the true story you want to tell. And that's why it takes time, and that's why it's very hard in this moment, in the current climate, academic climate, to present good qualitative research, and then to have it published later on is even harder. But don't give up. So is there virtual or net ethnography? Sorry, I'm not sure what time it is. Okay. So as I've said, I think and I feel the emphasis is upon detailing. The detail in which you can be true to what you're saying, the detail in which you can capture what's happening online. The events, those at the research site that you must choose, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in detail, you must choose your time frame, the process. It's important. We can't just retrofit research to what we're trying to do. In general, the ethnographer's long-term experience with that, all that encapsulates sentiments, experiences at a group on a broader level is important. The practitioner of ethnographic analysis, by accumulating and assimilating their contact with a range of informants, they aim to provide a broad account of what is happening, how to represent those informants, the people that you are experiencing, are immersed with. But this is always informed by the researcher, and this is our researcher's dilemma. You must be the medium in which the story is told. So you have a responsibility. You must be sensitive. You must have expertise. It's okay to start, and you must start. You have to keep writing, 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 and that's why we all hate we have to read and write every single day, or as regularly as we can. So we come back. It is a traditional approach. We gather our data, we analyse it, And ultimately, we want to produce an accurate account. Now, all research, scientific research, does this. But coming back to how are we going to manage the technology? What's happening with this virtual ethnography, this relationship between online and offline? I've been reading a lot of Fuchs stuff. Why am I reading it? It's because I write a subject about globalization. So this issue of culture across the world is making me think about power relations. So if you haven't read Fuchs' Social Media as a Critical Introduction, it's very, very good. So have a look. But what I like, so what he said is, media are not technologies, but socio-technical systems. So us as the researchers, this is what we're grappling with. We're at a moment of time, this relationship between the social and the technical is a bit blurred. We've got all these theorists. Is it subjective? What is agency and subjectivity? Is it slipping? Is it still that humans have the subjectivity? Objects have the agency? Now, these aren't questions you're going to answer with your PhD. You're not going to answer them with one research study. They are continual. They will haunt you for your life. But these are the things that inspire us. It isn't easy. So this is why I'm ill at ease. How am I going to approach it? So I come back to tradition. And I come back to what I was trying to say before. It's important to the end product, the voice, what you're trying to represent. So this is another quote from my original study. The first one was from those scientists designing the projects that then the citizens would analyse. So they understood themselves more as computer scientists. They had more to relate to computation. Whereas my student, who was the ethnographer, most of you writing up PhDs, you know you're being told more and more. You have to give your own story, what motivates you. Part of what you're going to do in your Viva, 100% guarantee, the reviewer is going to ask you what's motivating you to do the study. It's important in an ethnography that you're true to this. It has a different dimension. So if you're going to be examined, it's not just enough to say, it's a great study, it's a great opportunity. There has to be, and you have to be able to explain how well you know this community. This comes back again to the question about who you are, and it's even harder for professional researchers because you're going to have to jump in and out. Can you ever be true? There's a big question there. So the ethnographer, she said, I consider myself to be quite a geeky person. And the majority of my interests fall within mainstream and geek culture, such as video games, comics, films. I often obsess over certain elements of these and then move on to something else. I like being with and talking with other people with similar interests to myself, as I like the sense of community and belonging it gives me. So quite different descriptions. One's critical of the organisational component. One's just a description about herself. But these are the things I have to put against each other and understanding what I'm trying to say in the end. How true am I being to these users? They're all users of this platform that I'm wanting to say something about. So that's what I have to do. In the beginning of my research process, I need to think, what information is going to give me the best data to be able to then understand my users to write it up properly? And this is where I think this is what I'm hoping will help me. So when I get this whole suite of various digital data, all these wonderful things, the reach, how many people posted versus how many people engaged, all this stuff, is it going to be useful? So I can pare it down. Yes, my diary will always be useful. The richer my diary, the better. Because that's my bridge between the online and offline. I then become the conduit. Interviews are important because no matter how you're getting them, they are another representation of the true voice. Interviews are what, especially if you can capture them properly, they are represented, they are what the person is saying. So they're very, very useful. And in the method, you know, as an ethnographer, it's the cherries. Your experience as a lived, engaged person, know the key people. You know those persons' voices who are strong, or you know the opposite, those who are fading. And depending on what you're trying to look at, they're the ones you're focusing on. So it's important. Now, many of us send off. We have reams and reams, hours and hours and hours of interviews. We don't even listen to them again. We pay someone else to do it. Interviews, I often find them interesting, though. And then screenshots. I'm finding they are very useful at the moment. I'm grappling with, as I said, the visual component, but I'm sure that's going to improve. And Shirky has helped me also. She says, social media and social software, remember, are tools. And the anthropologist in me loves this too. They increase our ability to share, to cooperate with one another, and take collective action, all outside the framework of traditional institutional organisations. So it's this bridging between the organisation, between our social, our cooperation, our sharing, that we're starting to get filled with our data, filled with, are we qualitative, quantitative? For me, the easiest way is just to step back a bit. What am I trying to do? As a suggestion to students, I say, make funny little cards. I'm very much a visual person. Stick things around. Do whatever it is to bring you back to your central question. What you're trying to achieve, how what you're doing is achieving it. So turn to existing methodological protocol. Try to I know it gets boring, and many of us hate going to understand things about interviews and stuff, but it's important. So because we're using all of this, because we can't deny technology is becoming part of who we are and an everyday experience, we would expect now more and more and more that people are going to be discussing in all qualitative research the technological exchange and how it's impacting. So it's going to be vital for everybody to understand it. What does it mean when I'm involved in a blog? What does it mean when I want to go out on a Friday night, don't quite know what's on, ask all my Facebook friends? Why am I doing that? What does that mean in the community that I'm talking to? So these things present both opportunities, but they're also challenges. Because as I think we take them away from the social component, we forget the importance, the value of the humanities. The humanities are in trouble. So data, our tool, the foundation of what we do everything, it can shed light into people's habits, opinions, behaviours, and it's now more available because we can go into groups where there's thousands of people. You can access material. You've never even seen this person. You know you'll never see them. How are you going to represent their voice? So don't give up. Keep going. We can never have all the answers, and it'll be great to see how people are going to integrate these in. Now, just quickly, I've just got a few bits, and then I'm going to give you some tips. So I think methodologically, if I break it down, so I've said analysis, ethnographic analysis is important. However, also your ethnographic method is important, how you're gathering the data. Now, I've reviewed a couple of papers, one for MISQ Quarterly, recently, who've been trying to use virtual ethnography, Netnography. My advice to those who are doing it, be very clear. You'll have to go deep if you're going to get into a good journal. Participant observation is an ethnographic tool. You don't have to be, we know Garfinkel's famous study where in the tea rooms where he became involved with prostitutes and reconvened the story. A true ethnography. How are we going to do that in this stage? You either do it through the voices of those that you're observing, and you acknowledge I'm a participant observant, or you live it. You become part of the community. You must have, therefore, some deep integration with what's going on. You can't fake it. So, interpretive analysis of a group's social interaction is what participant observation is. Garfinkel and Saussure also say interviews are not enough alone. I see many, many, particularly master's students at this moment in time, they just do 20 interviews, especially in the business school. If you don't understand, if these 20 people aren't core to what's been, who they are and they're representing, the CEOs of some multinational firm or whatever, that isn't a true representation. 20, a magic number, doesn't allow. It's not 38, it's not 52. It's how well you gather the information about, in a qualitative study, those 20 people. So how can you do that in 15, 20 minutes? So it's not enough in participant observation just to observe, or not just to interview. So this is also, you must have thick description. You need to go back and learn and practice writing. And thick description is description. If anybody goes on, if interested in what I'm doing, I also do another method about science fiction prototyping. The use of the narrative to more emotively, to whatever you're trying to achieve. If it's darkness, you can write darkness in your words. If you want to express love, you talk about it. And this is what the humanities, we need to do this again. Go and write, go and sing, go and create. So you need to include this in your data. You must have thick description. You must accept, I hate this person. They are core to the running of this organisation. Every time they come in the room, everybody freezes. Those descriptive elements are vitally important in a ethnography. So practice diaries, practice writing in that style as well, I hope. So they are linked. This problem with methods is analysis, the structure, the process in which you're doing things. Both ethnography and participant observation mean that you must purposefully prepare. You have to know before you go in what you're doing. We know sometimes unexpected things happen and we have to retrospectively fix our process. But that can become very difficult. It's much easier if you do it clearly in the beginning. So deciding how, where, and when participation happens. Fully a year in, how am I going to have a year out just going online every day? You must make these decisions. Am I just going to be there for 2 days a week? None at all. I'm not going in. I'm going to shadow Thunderbolt, who's going to be my representative in the chat group. But make those decisions early. And there's two extremes. So one form is interactively fully covering the immersion, where your identity is hidden. Now, many of us, as we look at information, our data, our experiences online, how much are you revealing even normally to your community who you are? Your Facebook community knows who you are. Your Snapchat community, less so. And your data is very transitory. So the motivation of using that is even part of the qualitative description. All that you need to think about. So then we have total non-participation, where a researcher doesn't even sit in the same room. But they are able to record everything. So this whole, some of you might be doing videos. I know the people recording today, videos. There's new software available that allows you to tag, freeze frames and videos. Getting close to en vivo, maybe some people are using it. So you capture the spots, you tag it, and then thousands of hours can be crunched over. So then as you go back through your visual, it'll grab a screenshot. You'll be able to write a story about it. These are the positive things that are happening with the technology. But knowing what you're going to do, this is what I'm trying to say at this moment in time. Start clearly. So if we start clearly, then we can use all these things. We can use a textual analysis, the written quote. We can use our visual elements, the pictures of the penguins. And then we can use our field diary because we're writing these together. And all of these lead to an analysis, which then we can focus on writing it up true to the voice. And that, I feel, is a strong ethnography. Now, I'm just going to throw in a bit of a tailspin. I'm getting towards the end. There are a number of debates. Now, this might rile a few people up, and I'm more than happy to talk about it. The lurking ethnographer. We all, as online researchers, are a bit guilty of this. Now, I think we need to get over our guilt and make a decision. Either are you going to reveal that you're there early on, or are you going to write up, "I always hid from them"? Just being true is right, but you'll have to build it into your research process, your design. So the questions around, a lurking ethnographer would find it difficult to experience the mixture of forms of engagement, this is what Mason is telling us, that can prevail where the public space of a bulletin board is supplemented by various kinds of chat. So he or she doesn't believe that one online site is enough. You must have ways in, because the community, although it has a flat platform, there's much more going on. If you are studying a community of people that occasionally, once a year, come together, it's important that you go to that 1 year gathering so you can understand and explain that. If there's secret hidden places, you've got to figure out how you're going to access those. The darknet. Somebody, I think, said they're doing the darknet. How are you going to get access to that? It's not as easy as you think. So public places are important because the way that the community represents itself personally in a personal hidden space versus a public space is quite different, and you need to know them if you're going to represent that voice. So trying out what it's like to be a participant member can also be a complex problem. So the idea of employing flexibility and multiple sources can overcome this. So you need to be creative. Ethnographies in these settings needs to be more flexible and more agile than we have in the past. Now, I found that with my diary, because what you're doing as you're sitting, I haven't just relied on one postdoctorate. I do my own ethnographies as well, just in case people doubt. So as you're doing what you're doing online, you're tapping away at screens. You're either having to flick between the screen of what you're writing up online, or you have to do it old method, or you have to have so many things that you're taking pictures, you're jumping between various parts of what you're trying to bring in together. It's hard. So you need to figure out how you're going to do it. But be flexible. Use as many as you can. So the last of my, let's simplify the idea. Think about all your data, your screenshots, your raw data. Think about the narrative in which you can most accurately convey the type of people that you're talking about, those users that you're trying to represent, or the ideology that you're trying to represent. If it's about power, if it's about inequality, people swear, people do things. Those voices must come out in your representation. We all go, ooh, I have to swear in a conference. But it's all right, because that's what you're having to do. This is the way. It isn't about a fact. It's about the true story. Vitally different in understanding this form of research. So an accurate account. So, quickly recapping. Ethnography is a textual construction of reality. The depth, the detail is the text. We have to have as much as we can. We love Clifford and Marcuse. So the key principle is developing understanding through a progressive collection of data, focusing on inquiry, coming back to our research process. Virtual ethnography, therefore, remains consistent with traditional ethnography. It's not a huge step away. It's just we have to grapple with how we're going to describe that and be able to replicate it, because everybody wants to do it again, remember. So I like Byam's ethnographic approach, who says participation is used as a means to understand important aspects of social life. So if your social life, it's important for that community to be representing value as love, you must do that. The social component is what comes through in the voice and the findings. So the detail, as I'm saying 50 times, is important. The importance of traditional life diaries, I feel, is the key for how I'm being able to manage what I'm doing. It's involved, we're now using visual elements, and that needs still a bit of work, but this is the potential that both you as PhD students, new researchers, you're the strongest people to do this at the moment. One, you don't only have the technology knowledge, much different to my generation, but also you're energetic, you love it. So you've got new ideas. So think about it. I know also the problem you have, you are being under pressure. Now we have to do things in 3 years, supervisors, eProg, all this stuff. But keep remembering, keep thinking. There's always 7 papers that can come out of your thesis. 1 at least is a methods paper. Oh, that was the one I wanted to cut out. So what do I say? How do we wrap this up? Each environment requires a certain amount of learning. If you're going online, as the summer school offers, it's important to learn the IRC chat, the platform, whatever if you're going to be part of a community, you can't go in pretending that you know what's going on. There has to be experience beforehand. So you must make it, you must practice. It might take 2 months, write it up in how I'm doing this study, 2 months to learn the technology I need to be able to be part of this community so I can represent the voice. So if you're going to, I've been doing some stuff about online gaming. Online gaming site needs the ethnographer to develop appropriate gaming skills, sit there for hours, shoot people, do all that stuff. You have to be able to do it, or else you can't talk about it. Some naivety of technology is going to be, we all can't know everything and technology keeps changing. So be prepared if you're going to get deep, that you're going to have to spend some time. So you need to also know the way in which people are speaking. Are they using emojis a lot? Is your old way of talking online different? Is that going to impact on your research? It may be similar but in the gaming experience, but we also have to be intuitive. You're not going to be the fully formed gamer, #1 in the world as you go in. You are going to make mistakes. So build that into your writing. That's perfectly fine. But important, back to my core point, be true to what you're trying to say. The study at the end has to have an authentic and trustworthy voice. And you can bring this right through to the beginning of your research design to the papers that you publish. How can online research be authentic is what we keep going. It's this binary between the real life, what we're feeling here, what we're seeing here today. This is real. What we do online isn't really real. Now, we all question that. So the research is being dogged by this as well. Hine and Carter say, the main doubt should only arise when questions of authenticity are raised by those that you're studying. And that will happen. As soon as if you say, coming to this community, I'm going to study you, they instantly often say, what's going on here? Same as if you go into a business. Same if you went to a prostitute cafe. The people you study always are going to be a bit concerned. So don't worry about that. You have to bridge that. So it's not radically different to all other ethnographies. And the trick is, are you going to be true? So there's always opportunities to deceive. There's always, especially you as a researcher in a position of power, to push your own agenda. But if you're going to be a true good ethnographer, a true good qualitative researcher, that's not your motivation, in my opinion. So there's usually opportunities to compare between different online situations and to associate with people over time. It doesn't have to be that it's 10 years, but time appropriate. And you can justify it. In your PhD, in your research, it's always important to be justifying what you're doing. Explain it. This community only existed for 6 months. If I had to do it for 2 years, it wouldn't be there. If I'm doing virtual organisations, they can come together only to discuss corporate things, moments in time. How are you going to represent that voice? all interesting and important questions. So online ethnographers do need to earn the trust of their members they're studying, because that's vital. The members need to feel comfortable that the researcher is appropriate. So even if you want to do the most amazing study, you might not be able to. Therefore, we need to negotiate access every single time. Self-resent in a way that threatens members, and try not to be threatening is what I'm trying to say there. You're coming in as representing that community, that voice, so you must be part of that community. And this can be difficult. So you can see the most important thing here in the online ethnography debate is this idea of consent. How? It's not only just about your ethics board, but how has this community said, yes, we want you to tell our story. And Frankel and Siang say, because online research invariably involves human subjects as research, subjects must provide with information that enables them to be an informed decision about what's going on, how they're participating, who's going to write their story. So there's going to be challenges. And what I've often found, the easiest way is to find a champion. Someone you're going to shadow, someone who's true behind your study. It always makes it easy. It is not always there, but do try to find a champion within that community or the organisation you want to study. So what do? We be clear about what we're doing. The purpose of our research is vital. So those people who are writing posters, those people who are writing up, and they're still not clear themselves. Why am I doing this? You're always going to struggle. You must have, am I a critical theorist? And be true, it's okay. Be clear about your potential risks and the risks to your participants. So, cybercrime. We know as social scientists, even with our best intentions, capitalism, nastiness in the world, twist our words. You have to let it go. It's like when you donate, when you give to charity. It's not your choice. You put your work out there, and it's contributing to a bigger bubble for whatever happens. But you acknowledge it, and you don't try and hurt anyone, but you give a true representation. So make clear that cooperation is voluntary. Don't force anyone to stay part of anything, and if you have to drop out yourself because it becomes dangerous, you must do that. Researchers also need to be sensitive to participants and sensitive to the way in which you're going to convey the story later on, because ultimately that's our legacy, that's their legacy. It's written in time. So I've included quite a bit of reference lists, and that's all I want to say. Thank you.